Simple woman kicked out of restaurant. Minutes later, her billionaire husband's Porsche arrives. She never expected that her casual clothes would get her thrown out of the fine dining establishment. But when her husband shows up, everything changes in an instant. The soft glow of evening lights illuminated Hannah Parker's face as she navigated the busy streets of downtown Boston. At 34, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was. Her beige cardigan and comfortable shoes reflected her practical nature rather than her financial status. Tonight was special. After 14 years of marriage to tech innovator Michael Parker, Hannah was planning a surprise for their anniversary. Michael had been working relentlessly on launching his new sustainable energy platform, and she wanted to reserve a table at the Crystal Palace, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the same place where they'd had their first date. Back when Michael was just a promising engineer with big dreams, and Hannah was teaching art at the community center. Hannah checked her watch. Perfect timing. She'd just finished her weekly pottery class at the local studio, clay still faintly visible beneath her fingernails. She hadn't planned to dress up yet. The reservation was for next week, and today she simply wanted to secure it in person, knowing how difficult it was to get a table there. The restaurant came into view, an elegant building with golden lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Through the large windows, Hannah could see crystal chandeliers hanging from ornate ceilings, illuminating tables draped in pristine white cloth, where Boston's elite dined in their finest attire. Taking a deep breath, Hannah pushed open the heavy glass door. Victoria, the maitre d', stood at her station, immaculately dressed in a tailored black suit. Her eyes swept over Hannah, narrowing slightly at her casual appearance. "Good evening," Hannah said warmly. "I'd like to make a reservation for next Friday, if possible." Victoria's expression remained professionally neutral, though her tone carried a hint of dismissal. "I'm afraid we're fully booked for the next 3 months, madam." Hannah smiled, undeterred. "I understand how busy you must be. It's for a special anniversary, and this place means a lot to my husband and me." Before Victoria could respond, a man in an expensive suit approached the desk. Hannah recognized Richard Hammond, a local real estate developer known for his flashy lifestyle and regular appearances in Boston's social pages. "Victoria, my usual table isn't prepared properly," Hammond complained, not bothering to acknowledge Hannah's presence. "And I specifically requested the 82 Bordeaux to be ready." "Right away, Mr. Hammond," Victoria responded, her demeanor instantly transforming to attentive deference. Hammond finally glanced at Hannah, his eyes making a quick, dismissive assessment. He leaned toward Victoria, speaking in a stage whisper clearly meant to be overheard. "I thought this establishment had standards. Since when do we let just anyone walk in off the street?" Victoria cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Sir, I was just explaining that we're fully booked." Hannah felt a flush creep up her neck, but maintained her composure. "As I was saying, it would be for our anniversary. Perhaps I could speak with the manager about any possible—" "Listen," Hammond interrupted, turning to face her directly. "This isn't some casual diner. People wait months for reservations. They dress appropriately." He gestured toward her clay-stained jeans with distaste. Hannah straightened her shoulders. "I understand the restaurant's prestige, sir. I'm only trying to make a reservation for next week, not dine tonight." Hammond snorted. "Victoria, please handle this situation. My guests are waiting." As Hammond walked away, Hannah noticed several diners watching the exchange with interest, some with thinly veiled amusement. She turned back to Victoria, determined to complete her task despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I apologize for the interruption," Hannah said, maintaining her dignity. "As I was saying about the reservation—" Victoria cut her off with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps I wasn't clear, madam. We simply don't have availability." Hannah reached into her purse. "I understand this is a prestigious establishment. I'm prepared to place a deposit if that would help secure a table." She pulled out her wallet, but Victoria held up her hand. "It's not a matter of deposits," she said, her voice lowering. "The Crystal Palace caters to a certain clientele. We have standards to maintain." The implication hung in the air between them. Hannah felt her cheeks burn, not from embarrassment now, but from indignation. "I see," she replied evenly, "and those standards are based on appearance, not character." Victoria's expression hardened. "Madam, perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the bistros down the street. They're quite lovely and more accommodating to casual diners." From his table, Hammond watched the exchange with undisguised satisfaction. He raised his voice just enough to be heard by nearby tables. "Some people simply don't understand their place. This isn't a soup kitchen." A few patrons chuckled, emboldening the restaurant's female manager, Elaine, who had been observing from nearby. She approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. "Is there a problem here, Victoria?" she asked, her gaze fixed critically on Hannah. "This woman was just leaving," Victoria replied smoothly. Hannah stood her ground. "Actually, I was trying to make a reservation for a special occasion. My husband and I—" "Madam," Elaine interrupted, her tone condescending, "I must ask you to leave. You're disturbing our guests." Hannah looked around, bewildered. "I'm simply trying to make a reservation. How is that disturbing anyone?" Hammond chimed in again from his table. "Some people need to be told twice, apparently." Elaine moved closer, lowering her voice to a threatening whisper. "Madam, either you leave voluntarily, or I'll be forced to have you escorted out." Hannah felt a surge of disbelief. This couldn't actually be happening. "Is this how you treat all potential customers, or just the ones who don't arrive in designer clothes?" The manager's patience visibly thinned. "We have the right to refuse service to anyone who doesn't meet our establishment's standards." "And what standards would those be?" Hannah challenged, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Elaine glanced toward Hammond, who gave a subtle nod. The message was clear: valued customers were being disturbed. "Thomas," Elaine called to a young man in a suit standing near the entrance. "Please escort this woman out. She's causing a disturbance." The young man looked uncomfortable, but approached dutifully. "Ma'am, if you could please come with me." Hannah remained rooted to the spot, processing the absurdity of the situation. "You're actually throwing me out for trying to make a reservation while dressed comfortably?" "We're simply maintaining our atmosphere," Elaine replied stiffly. "Our clientele expects a certain environment." Thomas hesitantly placed a hand near her elbow, careful not to actually touch her. "Please, ma'am." Hannah looked around at the watching diners, some uncomfortable, others amused, most simply turning away to their conversations, dismissing the scene as unimportant. She thought about arguing further, about mentioning who her husband was, but every time she tried, someone would interrupt her. "My husband is—" Hannah began. "Let me guess," Elaine said with a smirk. "Someone very important? We hear that quite often, I'm afraid." "If you would just let me explain," Hannah tried again. "There's nothing to explain," Victoria interjected. "The Crystal Palace has clear standards, and we're simply enforcing them." With as much dignity as she could muster, Hannah allowed herself to be escorted toward the exit. Behind her, she could hear Hammond's satisfied chuckle and his stage whisper, "Finally. Some people are just too poor to stay." As she reached the doorway, Hannah turned to look at the manager. "You've made a mistake." "The only mistake," Elaine replied coldly, "was allowing you through the door in the first place." Thomas held the door open, his eyes downcast, clearly uncomfortable with his role in this public humiliation. As Hannah stepped outside into the cool evening air, she pulled out her phone. This wasn't how she had planned to involve Michael in her anniversary surprise, but plans had changed. What she didn't know was that her husband's sleek black Porsche was already turning the corner, heading toward the restaurant. Michael had decided to surprise her after finishing his meeting early, remembering she had mentioned stopping by the Crystal Palace to make their anniversary reservation. If this story is touching your heart, hit that subscribe button and join our community. You won't want to miss what happens next in this powerful moment of truth. The evening air felt unexpectedly cold against Hannah's flushed cheeks as she stood outside the Crystal Palace. The humiliation stung, not because she valued the opinion of people who judged her by appearance, but because the injustice was so blatant, so unapologetic. Through the glass doors, she could still see Victoria and Elaine exchanging satisfied glances, as if they'd successfully protected their precious establishment from an unwanted intruder. Hannah's fingers hovered over her phone, about to call Michael, when the distinctive purr of a finely tuned engine caught her attention. A sleek black Porsche 911 glided to a stop directly in front of the restaurant, its polished surface reflecting the golden lights from the entrance. Hannah's heartbeat quickened. She would recognize that car anywhere. Inside the Crystal Palace, the smooth operation of exclusive dining continued uninterrupted. Hammond was regaling his companions with some self-important story, his boisterous laughter carrying across the room. Victoria had returned to her post, while Elaine was personally attending to another well-dressed couple. The restaurant's front door opened again, drawing Victoria's practiced smile, a smile that froze when she saw who entered. Michael Parker stood in the doorway, his tall frame impeccably dressed in a midnight blue tuxedo that exuded quiet wealth. At 40, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had nothing to prove, his success speaking for itself. His eyes swept the restaurant with laser-like precision until they found Hannah outside on the sidewalk. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by something harder, more focused. "Good evening," Victoria greeted, her professional demeanor instantly engaged. "Welcome to the Crystal Palace. Do you have a reservation, sir?" Michael turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I'm meeting my wife." Victoria's smile brightened. "Of course, sir. May I have the name for your reservation?" "Parker," he replied simply. "Michael Parker." The effect was immediate but subtle. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment, the name Parker carrying weight in Boston's business circles. She quickly recovered, though uncertainty now tinged her confidence. "Mr. Parker," she said, managing to maintain her composure, "I don't believe we have a reservation under that name tonight." "That's because my wife came to make one," Michael replied, his voice level but with an edge that made Victoria straighten. "For our anniversary next week. She just stepped out, it seems." Victoria's complexion paled slightly. "Your wife was here? Perhaps you could describe her?" Michael's gaze sharpened. Blonde hair, beige cardigan, probably mentioned our anniversary. The blood drained from Victoria's face as realization dawned. From his table, Hammond watched the exchange with growing interest, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Sir, there may have been a misunderstanding," Victoria began, but Michael was already moving past her, opening the door and extending his hand to Hannah. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly as Hannah took his hand and stepped back inside. "Not exactly," Hannah replied, her voice steady despite the emotional current running beneath. The restaurant had grown oddly quiet, conversations tapering off as patrons sensed the unfolding drama. Elaine approached quickly, having registered that something was amiss at the entrance. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her eyes darting between Michael's unmistakably expensive attire and Hannah's casual clothing, mental calculations visibly racing behind her practiced smile. "Yes," Michael said calmly. "I understand my wife was just asked to leave your establishment." Elaine's professional mask slipped for just a second before settling back into place. "There must be some confusion. We have certain standards for our guests and—" "Standards?" Michael repeated, the word hanging in the air like crystal about to shatter. "What standards exactly would prevent my wife from simply making a reservation?" Hannah watched as the restaurant staff's confidence began to crumble. Victoria was now frantically flipping through reservation cards, perhaps hoping to find evidence that she'd somehow accommodated Hannah after all. "Sir," Elaine tried again, lowering her voice, "perhaps we could discuss this privately? I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "I don't think so," Hannah interjected, finding her voice. "You were quite clear about your standards and how I don't meet them." From his table nearby, Hammond cleared his throat loudly. "The woman was causing a disturbance," he offered, apparently unable to read the changing dynamics of the room. "Some people simply don't know how to behave in establishments of this caliber." Michael turned slowly, taking in Hammond for the first time. "And you are?" "Richard Hammond," he replied with evident self-importance. "I'm something of a regular here." "I see," Michael said, his tone deceptively conversational. "And you felt it necessary to involve yourself in how the restaurant treated my wife?" Hammond's confidence wavered as he finally registered the subtle signs of power and wealth that Michael carried effortlessly. Not in flashy displays, but in the quiet certainty of his bearing. "Your wife?" Hammond repeated, his voice losing its authoritative edge. "Yes, Mr. Hammond, my wife, Hannah Parker." Michael's voice remained calm, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Co-founder of the Parker Innovation Foundation, board member of the Boston Museum of Modern Art, and the woman who just wanted to make a dinner reservation to celebrate our anniversary at the place where we had our first date. The silence in the restaurant was now absolute. Even the kitchen staff had paused to watch through the service doors. Victoria stood motionless at her station, reservation book still open in her hands. Elaine's professional smile had disappeared entirely. Hannah felt no triumph in their discomfort, only sadness at how quickly humans judge one another based on such superficial criteria. "Michael," she said quietly, placing a hand on his arm. "It's okay. Let's just go." But Michael wasn't finished. His gaze remained fixed on Hammond, who was now shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "You know what fascinates me, Mr. Hammond?" Michael continued. "How often people confuse wealth with worth." The Crystal Palace remained suspended in a charged silence. Every eye was fixed on the tableau near the entrance. Hannah in her simple clothes, Michael in his perfect tuxedo, and the restaurant staff caught in a moment of dawning horror. "Mr. Parker," Elaine finally managed, her voice no longer carrying its earlier condescension. "Please accept our most sincere apologies for this terrible misunderstanding. We would be honored to prepare a table for you and Mrs. Parker immediately." Michael's expression didn't change. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, the words hanging in the air. "Is that what we're calling it?" Thomas, the young man who had escorted Hannah out, stood nearby, his discomfort palpable. Unlike the others, he seemed genuinely distressed by what had transpired. "Sir," Victoria interjected, her professional veneer cracking further. "We had no way of knowing who Mrs. Parker was. If she had just explained—" "She tried," Thomas said quietly, surprising everyone, including himself. "Several times." Victoria shot him a withering glance, but the young man continued, something like conviction, strengthening his voice. "Mrs. Parker tried to explain who she was, but she was interrupted. She mentioned her husband, but no one listened." Hammond, unwilling to be sidelined in the unfolding drama, rose from his table. "Now, see here. The woman was clearly underdressed for an establishment of this caliber. Rules exist for a reason." Michael turned to face him fully. "Mr. Hammond, I'm curious. What exactly do you believe makes someone worthy of respect?" The question hung in the air, deceptively simple, yet devastating in its directness. Hammond blinked, caught off guard. "Well, obviously certain standards must be maintained," he blustered. "People work hard to achieve a certain position in life, and with that comes certain privileges." "Interesting," Michael replied. "My wife works with children who have nothing. She teaches art to help them express trauma they can't put into words. She sits on boards that determine how millions in charitable funds are distributed." His voice remained conversational, yet carried to every corner of the now silent restaurant. "She chooses to dress practically because her work is about substance, not appearance." Hannah squeezed Michael's arm gently. This display wasn't his usual style. Michael typically avoided confrontation, preferring to let his work speak for itself. But tonight, watching the righteous indignation in his eyes, she was reminded of why she had fallen in love with him all those years ago. "Michael," she said softly, "it's really okay." He looked at her, his expression softening. "It's not okay, Hannah. Not just because of you, but because of how many others they've probably treated this way. People who don't have the privilege of walking back in and exposing their prejudice." Elaine stepped forward, desperation now evident in her manner. "Mr. Parker, please, allow us to make this right. We can discuss this privately in my office." Michael turned back to her, his composure intact, but his resolve evident. "Make it right? I don't think you understand what's happened here. This isn't about getting a table now that you know who we are. It's about the fact that you believe some people deserve basic dignity and respect, while others don't." Several diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the entertainment they had expected with their expensive meals. Not this mirror being held up to reflect the ugly side of exclusivity. From across the room, an elderly couple rose from their table. The woman, elegant in her understated evening wear, made her way over to Hannah and Michael. "Young man," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of Boston society, "you are absolutely right." The woman turned to face the restaurant staff. "My husband and I have been dining here for 20 years. We've watched this place change from a restaurant that valued character to one that values only appearances and connections. Tonight has confirmed what we've suspected for some time." Her husband joined her, nodding in agreement. "We won't be returning," he added simply. Hammond, realizing the tide was turning against him, attempted to salvage his position. "Now, Margaret," he said to the elderly woman, "surely you're overreacting. Standards must be maintained or else—" "Or else what, Richard?" Margaret challenged. "Or else we might have to judge people by their character rather than their clothing. What a terrible thought." Thomas stepped forward again, removing his server's jacket. "Ms. Elaine, I quit. I've been uncomfortable with how we profile guests for months, but tonight crossed a line I can't support." Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. "Thomas, don't be ridiculous. Think about your career." "I am," he replied simply, placing his jacket on the reception desk. Hannah watched this cascade of consequences with mixed emotions. She hadn't wanted this, hadn't intended to disrupt so many lives or create such a scene. Yet perhaps this moment of reckoning was overdue. "Michael," she said quietly, "let's go home." Michael nodded, knowing that spectacle had never been Hannah's style. As they turned to leave, Elaine made one desperate final plea. "Mr. Parker, please, your reservation for your anniversary. We would be honored to host you. Complimentary, of course." Michael paused at the door, turning back to face the restaurant. The patrons, the staff, Hammond, all waited for his response. "The purpose of our anniversary dinner," he said finally, "was to celebrate love, growth, and values that matter. I'm afraid those values are incompatible with what this establishment represents." As they stepped outside into the evening air, Hannah slipped her hand into Michael's. "That was quite a scene," she said, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Too much?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. Hannah considered this for a moment. "No," she decided, "not too much. Sometimes the world needs to be reminded that worth isn't determined by appearances." As they walked toward Michael's Porsche, neither noticed the young server, Thomas, exiting the restaurant behind them. He called out hesitantly, "Mr. and Mrs. Parker?" They turned, surprised. "I just wanted to say—" He began, then gathered his courage. "What happened in there wasn't right. And, well, I'd like to thank you for standing up. Not just for Mrs. Parker, but for all the others who've been treated that way, but couldn't do anything about it." Michael smiled, extending his hand. "Thank you for speaking the truth, Thomas. That takes real courage." "Do you have other plans?" Hannah asked suddenly. No, ma'am," Thomas replied, confusion evident on his face. "Then join us for dinner," she offered. "We know a wonderful little Italian place where they judge the food, not the guests." As the three walked away from the Crystal Palace, the weight of the evening's confrontation lifted. Behind them, through the restaurant's windows, Elaine could be seen addressing her staff with urgent gestures. Victoria sat at her station, shoulders slumped, and Hammond stood alone at his table, the center of attention he'd so craved now, focused on him for all the wrong reasons. 3 weeks later, Hannah sat at her pottery wheel, fingers coated in clay as she shaped a simple vase. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of her studio, illuminating particles of dust dancing in the air. This was her sanctuary, a place where worth was measured by intention and effort, not appearances or status. The door opened quietly, and Michael entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one near Hannah, careful not to disturb her work, then leaned against the wall to watch her skilled hands transform formless clay into something beautiful. "The board approved Thomas's proposal," Michael said after a comfortable silence. "Full funding for the Community Arts Initiative." Hannah smiled without looking up from her wheel. "I had a feeling they would. He has a natural talent for seeing potential where others don't." After that night at the Crystal Palace, Thomas had reached out to Hannah about his long-held dream of creating accessible arts programs in underserved communities. With her guidance, he'd developed a proposal for the Parker Innovation Foundation, transforming his experience in the service industry into valuable insights about breaking down barriers to participation. "Did you see the article?" Michael asked, sipping his coffee. Hannah nodded. The Boston Globe's feature on the Crystal Palace had created quite a stir in the city's dining scene. Not because it exposed what had happened to Hannah, she had specifically asked that her name be kept out of it, but because it sparked a broader conversation about exclusivity, judgment, and the invisible barriers that divided people. "Victoria called again," Michael added, "3rd time this week." After the incident, Victoria had left the Crystal Palace, her departure part of the restaurant's very public commitment to re-examine its values. Her heartfelt letter of apology to Hannah had been unexpected, not just expressing regret for that one evening, but acknowledging a pattern of behavior she was now working to change. "Maybe we should talk to her," Hannah suggested, her hands still working the clay. "Everyone deserves a chance to grow." Michael smiled at his wife's characteristic compassion. "You never cease to amaze me, you know that? After how she treated you." "It's not about forgetting what happened," Hannah clarified, finally looking up from her work. "It's about choosing how that experience shapes us moving forward. Victoria might become a powerful advocate against the very thinking she once embodied." Michael nodded, understanding. This was why he had fallen in love with Hannah in the first place, her ability to see beyond the surface, to find potential for good in the most unlikely places. It was what made her work with children so transformative, what made her presence on foundation boards so valuable, and what made her his moral compass when success threatened to distort his perspective. "We still haven't decided where to celebrate our anniversary," Michael reminded her. Their actual anniversary was just 2 days away. Hannah's hands stilled on the clay. "Actually, I have an idea about that." The following evening, Hannah and Michael stood outside a modest brick building in a neighborhood far removed from the glittering facades of Boston's high-end dining district. A simple sign read, "Community Table," and through the windows they could see people of all ages and backgrounds gathered around large wooden tables. "Are you sure about this?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. Hannah nodded. "Thomas said they're doing amazing things here. A pay-what-you-can model, cooking classes for kids, job training for those re-entering the workforce. It represents everything we believe in." Inside, they were greeted by a diverse staff who treated every guest with the same warm welcome. No one looked twice at Hannah's simple dress or raised an eyebrow at Michael's absence of tie. They were seated at a long table beside a family celebrating a child's birthday and across from an elderly man dining alone. Throughout the meal, simple but beautifully prepared food, Hannah and Michael were struck by the genuine community being fostered within these walls. Conversations flowed freely between tables. Laughter erupted spontaneously. The staff moved among the guests like old friends rather than servants. Midway through their dessert, Thomas appeared, his face alight with purpose as he introduced Hannah and Michael to the restaurant's founder, a former executive chef who had walked away from a prestigious position to create this inclusive space. "What do you think?" Thomas asked, his enthusiasm evident. "It's perfect," Hannah replied sincerely. "This is exactly what celebration should feel like: authentic, inclusive, joyful." As they prepared to leave, Michael discreetly arranged to cover meals for everyone in the restaurant that evening and to make a substantial donation to their community programs. Not as a display of wealth, but as an affirmation of values worth supporting. Outside, under a canopy of emerging stars, Hannah slipped her hand into Michael's as they walked to his car, the same Porsche that had caused such a stir at the Crystal Palace, now just a means of transportation rather than a statement. "Happy anniversary," Michael said softly, stopping to face his wife. 14 years, and you still help me see the world more clearly." Hannah smiled, the lessons of recent weeks settling into perspective. "Do you remember what you told me when we first met? That the most valuable things in life can't be bought or displayed?" Michael nodded, remembering their early conversations when he was just a promising engineer and she was teaching community art classes. "That night at the Crystal Palace," Hannah continued, "reminded me that we're all constantly making choices about what we value, about who deserves respect and attention. And those choices reveal who we truly are." As they drove through the city streets, neither Hannah nor Michael noticed the small sign in the window of what had once been the Crystal Palace. Under new management, all are welcome. Some transformations happen in dramatic moments, like a confrontation in an exclusive restaurant. Others occur quietly through reflection and choice, one person at a time. But all meaningful change begins with the recognition that true worth can never be determined by appearances alone. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from? Has someone ever misjudged you based on appearances? Your experiences matter to our community. We'll see you in our next powerful story that reminds us all of what truly matters in life.